accused of being un-American and unpatriotic and so on. And
well, I get it both ways. I'm accused of being anti-American and anti-Indian. So, you know, it's a very, you know, when you live outside of America, I'm always brought up short by the racism or the racist response to a racist war, you know, because the wars on Iraq and Afghanistan are seen as racist wars. People find it so easy to just hate Americans, and I, whom all the time vilified for being anti-American, am always in the extraordinary position of defending Americans and defending British people and saying, look, if India and Pakistan were fighting a war, I don't think 100,000 people would show up on the streets to protest, you know? It's always like about 9 of us or something.
It's interesting the way you're defending America by pointing to the people who are America, who represent the best ideals of America, and not the worst. And, you know, and I think that's what very often people lose, and I suppose they do the same thing with India as an abstraction, you know. And when people, and I've been accused of being anti-American, and I respond to that, you know, saying, you know, we must disagree about what America is. America is not Bush. America is not, you know, America, and, you know, America is not the government. And, you know, and we must look at the basic principles of democracy. We must look at the Declaration of Independence, you know, which is the fundamental philosophy of democracy. And it says governments are artificial creations. Governments are set up by the people to ensure certain rights, equality, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. When governments become destructive of those ends, I'm now quoting the Declaration of Independence, when governments become, if it doesn't mind, when governments become destructive of those ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish the government. You see, and if and if you have the right to alter or abolish the government, you certainly have the right to criticize the government, you know. But so, you know, the government is being anti-American when it goes against the principles of democracy. You know, that's how I feel about it. So I know, Arundhati, that you are pro-Indian in the best sense, and you are pro-American in the best sense. Yeah.
I try not to think in these categories, actually, you know. I just, I was in Porto Alegre in January, and a lady asked me to sign a petition against the war in Iraq, and I signed it, and it said name organization, and I wrote Arundhathi Roy, Zinn, which stands for the Sweethearts International Network. I'm actually not a nationalist of any kind, you know. I believe that I think it's very important to stop our minds coming up short against these artificial boundaries. And I think nationalism really does lie at the root of a lot of the troubles of this century and the last one. And we really need to question that. Because
I think maybe one of the ways to remind people of the dangers of nationalism is to ask people if they believe that people everywhere have an equal right to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness. Not just Americans, but everybody, everywhere in the world. And I think most people would agree. That most people would agree that everybody, and ask people if they believe that children, that the lives of children in Iraq are equal to the lives of children in the United States or in Russia or in China, you see. And if that is so, if all children everywhere have an equal right to life, then war becomes impossible. Because war is always a war against children. And so, and sometimes when people bring up, there are still, most people in the United States still defend the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. It's troublesome to think that most people in the United States still, because, they've been misinformed, they've been miseducated, they don't really, know what the situation was at that time. And also they aren't thinking in a certain way about the human race. And I ask people very often if when that issue comes up, after we've exhausted all the political and military arguments about what was happening in August of 1945, I said, well, look, if in August of 1945, you knew that we could end the war quickly by killing 100,000 American children, would you agree? Well, we know what answer people would give, of course not. Then why would we agree to kill 100,000 Japanese children in order to speed the end of the war? And I think the nationalism that you talk about, I think, when we put it in terms of human beings everywhere,
But the fact is that, when Madeleine Albright was asked about the death of 500,000 Iraqi children, she said she thought the price was worth it. And the trouble is that, when you live in a country like India, all the time you are faced with the horrors of living in a feudal society where people do believe that some of them are more equal than others. And, there is the whole issue of race and colonialism, and it is something that all of us need to ask ourselves very, very seriously. But the fact is that it is true today that if you kill 200,000 Iraqis, or you kill 200,000 Afghans, or you kill 200,000 Indians, or you kill 4 million people in the Congo, is not the same thing as 200,000 Americans or 200,000 British people or 200,000 Europeans. This is the truth. This is the way it is just now.
And I think, and you pointed to the 10 million or more people who on February 15th demonstrated all around the world against the war. And it must mean that there are huge, huge numbers of people around the world who recognize that. And I just want to say one more thing before I stop saying things. And that is that which connects with that wonderful day of enormous solidarity, international solidarity, brotherhood, sisterhood, human beings together that day. And there was, surprisingly, in the New York Times, the day after, a reporter said, some of you may have read this, the reporter said, talking about those demonstrations, said there are now two superpowers in the world, the United States and world public opinion. And I thought, Arundhati, it might be nice for you to read something which I think I heard you read, which I would like you to read just for my benefit.
it's just going to be a minute. This is the end of an essay called "The Ladies Have Feelings, So Shall We Leave It to the Experts?"